Hi there, welcome to Victim to Victor, the podcast dedicated to empowering abuse survivors and inspiring healing, hope, and positive change. I'm Verma, a published author, and in every episode, I'll sit down with a guest and embark on an insightful conversation about trauma, as well as practical strategies to start the healing process. So let's get started. I hope you enjoy the show. And here is lovely Lynn, all the way from upstate New York. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Anu. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast. And I want to say hello to all your listeners as well.
It's an
we have
absolute
a
honor.
good conversation.
Yeah, it's an absolute honor to have you on, and I'm really excited to hear your story, as I am with all of my guests. But with yours, it's quite a specific story because your history is around a dissociative identity disorder, and I must admit, you're probably the first guest coming on who is willing to talk so openly about this. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. So I mentioned in the intro that you have got a memoir called Crazy: Reclaiming Life from the Shadow of Traumatic Memory, which again I'm really excited to learn more about. So what motivated you to write this book?
So in my professional life, I was a teacher and a school principal and a pastor. And as I came close to retirement, I thought to myself, I should write books when I retire, or I should be writing in some way. But every time I said that to myself, there would be some kind of a block that would come up that would prevent me from even imagining what would I write about. Now, I've had a unique life and a very difficult life, but in some ways an interesting life. And I kept thinking, and I have lots of opinions. So I thought I should be able to write a book, but I couldn't think about what I'd write about. And then all of a sudden it came to me, well, the reason why you can't write about anything else, Lynn, is because you have to write this story. You have to write this story that encompasses a good 20 or more years of your conscious life.
Yeah.
And the incredible pain and desperation and devastation that you lived with during that period of time. And the fact that you came through it and you live a happy, fulfilled, and healthy life now. And I wanted to write this story to be perhaps a beacon of hope to other people who may be experiencing similar things, to know that there is not just hope, but there is really a path forward, even in the depths of despair. And so that's really why I wrote the book. In telling you that, I've skipped over the whole period before my retirement that encompasses my personal life, which was congruent with my professional life, but very different stories about what was happening to me professionally and what was happening to me personally.
Okay. I always say that for anybody who writes memoirs, there's always a story behind that. So, and I know we spoke about this already, the fact that you can't even remember what happened to you.
So I have what we call traumatic memory, and traumatic memory is stored in the back brain, which is where our emotions and our physical bodies store their memory, whereas our narrative, our cognitive memory, is stored in the front brain. And so I do have some cognitive memories of abuse, but very little, because most of it got stored in the back brain. And this is not uncommon for people with dissociative identity disorder because we experienced as small children chronic childhood abuse and trauma. And so in order to cope with that as small children, our brains use this really creative coping strategy by building walls around memories, or building walls around emotions, or building walls around experiences. And when it happens over and over again, eventually those walls sort of become solidified into what we call parts or alters or insiders that aren't necessarily aware of other parts, alters, or insiders. So this is really functional for a small child, because just think about this, Anu. If you're 3 years old, you rely on your caregivers, or you rely on your parents or the people who take care of you, because you're not capable of taking care of yourself. And so if those same people are also hurting you, it would be very difficult for you to go back and rely on them for your life needs. So a part of you doesn't know anything about the abuse. So that part can go back and live your life with these people who are taking care of you. But another part of you holds the memory or the abuse, both the bodily memory that's stored in the back brain, and in some cases, the cognitive memory that would be stored in the front brain. So it's very functional, actually, for the small child to do this. But as we get older, it becomes very dysfunctional, first of all, because we're not in danger anymore. And secondly, because we're adults and we can take care of ourselves. And thirdly, because there are many symptoms that are attached to dissociative identity disorder, and for that matter, to any form of childhood abuse that we need to heal from. And so we may not even realize we've been abused, but we might be experiencing feelings of unreality, of not actually being real, or feelings that the world around us isn't exactly real. Maybe our emotions and our thinking doesn't match. They just don't connect. We might have different streams of consciousness running through our head at the same time and not understanding what that means. It's just that I feel like I'm going crazy, which is why I entitled the book Crazy, which, by the way, I do want to comment that I am not crazy, and I was not crazy, nor is anyone who has dissociative identity disorder crazy. We feel crazy. We aren't crazy, but sometimes we feel that way. And with the appropriate treatment, we can come through that sense of craziness. But I wanted to clarify that, because I think some people are taken aback by my use of the word crazy. But I couldn't find any other word to describe it, because I that's in my journals. That's what I kept writing. I'm crazy. I feel crazy. I'm going crazy. Well, I wasn't crazy. What I was doing is I was feeling these traumatic memories that I had no idea where they were coming from, and they were making me feel like I was crazy. So some of the other symptoms that I experienced and that others might experience as well is just constant body pain, or sometimes specific body pain, suicidal ideation, and able to maybe really excel in one area of your life and totally decompose in another area of your life. So I don't want to suggest that my list of symptoms that I've just described to you is the end all and be all of symptoms. There are probably a larger list that you can draw on. But my symptoms were quite common for anyone who has a DID. That's the acronym for dissociative identity disorder. And I think most people with DID will have similar symptoms and may have others as well that I didn't have. In many cases, there's loss of time, and a lot of amnesia that goes along with it as well. in my case, the amnesia has been largely focused on the memories themselves, and amnesia between parts initially, but eventually we were able to lower the amnesia between the parts so that we all sort of were able to become part of one unified whole.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And when you talk about the trauma memory, I can really resonate with that, because I was basically, oh, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so did you miss that, what I just said?
I heard it, but it was
Okay.
a little quiet. Yeah.
Oh, okay, lovely. Yeah, so I was saying I can actually resonate with the trauma memory loss, because it was only really when I started to have some intimate relationships, and that was in my mid-20s, that I knew things weren't right, because I kept getting flashbacks.
Yes.
And then it was just like a gradual process, because even then you don't even link what's going on with these flashbacks. And then it takes, like for me, it took years of even understanding what happened to me, and then years of therapy work to actually really get to what happened and what it caused. So
Yeah.
it can be quite a long-winded process to even get to that stage of awareness and realization.
It is, and I think what you're describing can be terrifying, isn't it? When you're having flashbacks and you really don't know where they're coming from, or triggers which are related to flashbacks, where you have these overwhelming feelings about something, and where do they come from? What are they? What are they related to? And you're right, it takes a very long time to work through this. So in my case, I sort of divide that time of my life up into 2 decades. The first 10 years was when I was decompensating and had no idea what was going on. My inner life was falling apart. My personal life in my family was falling apart, and I was in pain, and I had this feeling of doom following me around, another feeling of shame, another feeling of fear. These were like clouds that were above me, or else they were actually inside of me, forcing me to roll up into a fetal position. And I had no idea what was causing this. At the same time, I was teaching. So I would go into the classroom and I was doing great. And then I actually became the head of a private school, and I was doing great there.
Strange.
But at home, inwardly and outwardly at home, I was literally falling apart.
Wow.
And so that was my decompensation. And that's when I had one attempt at suicide. And about 2 years after that suicidal attempt, I came out and I was like, I'm gonna get this together. I'm gonna pull my life together. I'm gonna heal myself. I'm gonna do it. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I continued to get worse and worse and worse. And so I finally checked myself 2 years later into a women's unit of a psychiatric hospital for 30 days.
Wow, okay.
And I know that in some cases, I've heard people have real horror stories about hospitalizations, but in my case, it was wonderful. It was a really good unit with really good people there. And it enabled me to stabilize. And actually all of the craziness that I had felt before I checked myself in settled down. I didn't have multiple voices anymore.
Wow.
I didn't feel suicidal. There were lots of programs you could get involved in the hospital, and that really fed my mind. I'm a person who needs to have a lot of organization and order in my mind, So, okay, yeah, I can do this. I can do that. I can do this. And so for 30 days, it settled down. Although there were some rough bumps. For instance, when one of my parents wrote a letter to my psychiatrist and told her to stay away from the hobgoblins of my past, But, I came out and I knew it wasn't going to last, but I also knew I didn't know how, but I knew I was going to find a way to turn my life around, to heal. And I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't know how to do that. but I got a new job. I moved to a different city, and I found a new therapist. And she happened to be a therapist who was very trauma informed.
Yeah.
In the meantime, over the period when I was out of the hospital, but I wasn't in the new job yet, I had a twilight dream that said, you have a twin sister, but she is me. And they gave her away, and her name is Rosie. Now that sounds really cryptic, right? And I had no idea what that meant because I didn't have a twin sister, and my parents never gave anyone away. But I just like stored it. I wrote it down in my journal, and I stored it in the back of my brain. When I began to work with my new therapist, Rosie made her appearance, and she was the first alter that I came to know, although other alters had come out and functioned in the years prior to meeting Rosie. They had never introduced themselves to me. I didn't know that they were alters, but I knew that Rosie was an alter. And so she introduced herself to my therapist, who welcomed her with open arms. She said, I'm so glad you're here, and I hope you come back again. And as Rosie began to share some of her memory fragments, because she was very little, but she had memory fragments. And as she began to share them, my therapist would always say, you were so brave to share that, and I hope you'll come back again. And I hope you'll feel comfortable to share more. And I have to just use her name because I can't keep going without saying my therapist's name. Her name is Sonia. So Sonia kept, when I had an angry alter come forward, and he was loaded for bear, and he was gonna break up the room. And she said, it's so nice to meet you, Mike. I'm glad you're here, and I know that you've been hurt, but you're not in danger anymore. And every alter who came forward, that's how she welcomed them, no matter how miserable they were. And some of them were really miserable. And as she began to treat them as the hurt children that they were, they began to trust her. And they began to trust me, and I began to trust them. And so we began to be able to work together. None of this, the second 10 years of this period of my life was meeting my new therapist, and then meeting all my alters and working with them to address the symptoms that everyone who has been sexually or otherwise abused as children have to deal with. We don't all create alters, but we all have to deal with trust issues. We all have to deal with relationship issues. We all have to deal with triggers. We all have to deal with flashbacks of some sort. We all have to deal with integrating the knowledge of our past, what is the truth of our past, into our present, So whether or not we have alters, we all have similar things to heal. And so in the case with DID, we are often working with the alters or the parts to heal them, but it's really the same process. And it's learning how to love ourselves, even those parts of ourselves. And I use that word generically right now for anyone out there who's been abused, whether or not you have DID parts. We all have parts. And so, the parts of us that have been wounded and hurt, we have to learn to love that part of ourselves. And so that was also a very hard time in my life, but at least after I was diagnosed, at least I had something to hang my hat on. At least I knew there was a reason for my craziness. And so I could start doing that work. And it took a good 10 years to do that work, to come to the place where I can say that I integrated, meaning that my parts no longer felt the need to come forward and front and be in control because they trusted me. And so I've been integrated for 20 years. Uh, and my parts occasionally still come out to talk to me or to express emotions that really need to be expressed, but mostly they're just a part of me. So I had a very angry part, and that has now become a part of the assertive Lynn. And I had a very sexual part, who is now the Lynn who can actually have intimate relationships and sexual relationships that are healthy. In my case, one sexual relationship that's healthy. I had a caregiver whose name was Nanny, who took care of Rosie, and she carried all of Rosie's pain, and she was exhausted all the time because of that. But that caregiver of Nanny is now a part of me, and I'm trying to run through my head for all my parts. I don't want to insult any of them for not mentioning them, but I had in my book, I talk about my 12 foundational parts, my 12 foundational alters. I actually probably had over 20 when you count the fragment parts. So sometimes you have a little. It's not a part that takes a large space in your life, but they took on a little piece of the abuse or the emotion. So we call them fragments. So I probably had over 20 when I count them in, but I had 12 foundational parts. So each of them are a part of me now, and I am whole and integrated, but because my brain was formed that way as a small child, that's why I say they're still there. Because I will never change that. That's called the structural theory of dissociation. That's the way your brain is still developing when you're a child. It hasn't fully developed. So if your brain develops with these different parts, then it's going to continue to have them, and I continue to have them. And but they rarely come out, and we've healed the other symptoms of abuse, which you well know about. So the same kinds of symptoms that you experienced, we experienced, and probably we did similar kinds of things to heal from them.
Yeah, and you also talk about faith in the in one part of your book. Tell us about that, and how you actually started to practice faith.
Yes, thank you so much for asking that question. I don't always bring it up because I know there are people who have certainly widely different views on that. And although I am an ordained minister, I am not proselytizing for faith. What I am proselytizing for is healing. But I was raised in a family that were atheists, and it was almost a religion in itself. And so I and very, very cognitive, like if you can't see, feel, taste, touch, or see it, it doesn't exist. And so that was really who I was as I grew up, although I always had this yearning. I always had a yearning. I went to Sunday school as a little girl. I always had a yearning, but I could not shake the atheism of my father, the agnosticism of my mother. And I read Jean-Paul Sartre, who's an existentialist, and I decided I'm going to become an atheist. So I was an atheist. I married a man who was also he was an ex-altar boy, and an atheist, and an academic in higher education. And so that's who I was, and that's who we were. But I always had that yearning. And as I began to fall apart in that first 10 years of my life, I was hired, first of all, by a Quaker school. And
Okay.
so before they hired me, I said to them, well, I think I have to be honest with you. I would love to teach your children. I've loved talking to you and interviewing with you, but I don't believe in God. And you need to know that, before we go further. And they said, we just have a sense that you're the person to teach our children.
Yeah.
We sense a spirituality in you that is what we want our children to know. And so I was sort of flabbergasted, but I was offered the job and I accepted it. And I became the first teacher at a one-room Quaker schoolhouse, which now has its own campus, and it's from preschool up through sixth grade. When I taught it, we had one little room with 15 students, K through 3. But anyway, that's a whole nother story in my life. But that sort of was a framework for me. And I started praying, God, give me strength and wisdom. God, give me strength and wisdom, without believing in God and without ever expecting my prayer would be answered. But I just needed to pray to stay alive. The act of praying kept me alive. And a year later, I looked back and I thought to myself, wow, I'm getting stronger, and I think I'm a little bit wiser. So, maybe someone or something is answering my prayer. So there's a long story, behind my evolution in faith. And I'm not sure you want to hear all of it, but just to say that that my faith roots me now. And I don't think that I could have healed so fully and completely without it. And my faith story, which is described in the book, is concurrent with my healing journey.
Yeah.
And so they are linked. At the same time, I want to say to people, if a particular religion or the idea of faith turns you off, then I affirm you in that, and just encourage you to find your own sense of inner strength that can help to take you forward. Yeah. Because my understanding of the place where I put my faith is that, we are all on journeys, and so I want to bless those journeys. I'm cautious about even using the word bless, but I want to bless every journey, wherever it's coming from and wherever it's going, as long as it's a healing journey, because that's what we're supposed to be doing, is to just keep following that path to healing that brings us whole in body, mind, and spirit.
That's beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And absolutely, I believe faith is so important, as is hope, having hope, and also for me, gratitude.
Yes. I have a wonderful story about gratitude in the book, because I for so many years, I didn't even know what gratitude was. It was like, I couldn't, I was in such pain. There was nothing for me to be grateful for.
Exactly. Yeah.
I went to this retreat that was on gratitude. Who knows why I went? Why did I go to this? After we did some meditation and some guided meditation, the retreat facilitator asked people to go around the room and share something they were grateful for today. And I kept thinking, oh no, what am I going to say? I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't. And, by the time she got to me, I said, I'm sorry, but I don't know. I've got so much on my plate right now. I just don't know that I can identify anything that I'm grateful for. And I thought she would shun me. I thought I would be shamed in that room. And I wasn't. She didn't miss a beat. And she said, thank you so much for being honest, because sometimes we carry so many burdens that we can't get in touch with our gratitude. And right then and there is when I realized, I do have something to be grateful for. These people who are all sitting, sharing their gratitude, accepted me. They accepted me even without gratitude, even without my being able to express gratitude. And after that, it became so easy. And I saw in my journal, I used to write, help me, help me, help me. And then I saw this dramatic shift. I would just say, thank you, thank you, thank you. Over and over again in my journal, I would just say, thank you, thank you, thank you. So gratitude for me is it is a gift. Gratitude.
It is. And for me, it just enhances my mood. Like, just starting off the day with gratitude instantly. If I wake up feeling a bit meh, just by thanking for just another day on earth, and thank you for my heart, which beats uncontrollably every day, and just the littlest things that we wouldn't even think about. Oh my goodness, there's just something healing.
Life, and thank you for breath. Thank you for life, and thank you for breath. And because I'm someone who attempted suicide and felt suicidal so much, that gratitude is so important. And I just want to share that with your listeners, that right now you may feel like life isn't worth living, but it is worth living. You are worth it. No matter how you feel, you are worth it. And just keep at it, keep on, keep moving forward. And someday you'll get to the place where you can feel that gratitude, because you are worth it.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. We are. And I was actually just thinking about maybe, if you wanted to talk a bit more about dissociative identity disorder for those listeners who may not have come across this before.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Well, so dissociative identity disorder was originally called multiple personality disorder.
Yeah.
And when I was diagnosed, actually back in 1992, that's what it was called. So I was diagnosed with personality disorder, or MPD. And about 2 years later, the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychiatric Disorders, renamed it to be dissociative identity disorder, or DID. And, we talked a little bit about how it forms in young children. It really does not form after, I don't know, the age of 6 or 8 or 10, because after that, our brains are already pretty well developed. That doesn't mean that we don't all have parts of some sort, but the parts that come from chronic trauma have to be created in that childhood period of time when the brain has not fully developed. So what you will find in adulthood or in adolescence, I think sometimes with some young folks, it really manifests itself in adolescence or early adulthood. And our parts start to come forward, because what happens is your psyche just cannot hold it in anymore. It just starts coming out, and it comes out in these parts that were created when we were very young. 95% of all people with DID have what we call covert DID, which means that unless you're in an intimate relationship with the person, you're not likely to see a switch. And this is very different from what we see in Hollywood, and I want to, sort of portray a different kind of a image of what DID is, because we created parts in order to hide the abuse from ourselves and others. We don't ordinarily, switch with any obvious signs or symptoms. Now there is 5 or 10% who do, and so I want to really acknowledge that. But for most of us, we don't obviously switch. We usually know when we've switched, but other people don't. Our therapists may know because they've come to see the very subtle signs that we make, but other people will not. Our spouses or significant others may know because they're intimate with us, but others will not. a lot of people think that DID is a very rare condition, but that is not true. DID research, traumatic memory research has determined that between 1% to 5% of the world population has DID. Maybe even more, because most people with DID are in the system for somewhere between 8 and 10 years before they're properly diagnosed. So 1% to 5% puts DID neck and neck with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia in terms of prevalence. And if we remember that it's actually a disorder that has saved our lives, so that these other parts of us, it may feel or seem or sound scary, but these are actually small children. Some of them have grown up, and so they take on adult personas in our lives, but they began as small children, and they actually saved our lives. They're not, they are a part of us, so they're not an alien force. They're different from schizophrenia, where people have voices outside of themselves talking to them. With DID, the voices are inside of us. And sometimes they manifest as voices, sometimes they manifest as feelings, sometimes they will take control, so to speak. That's really fronting. So a part of us might front. You might have noticed with me, well, Lynn seems pretty quiet right now. And then the next day, Lynn's really acting. Lynn's pretty assertive today, and so that's a different part of me who's coming to the front to manage a situation or to run away from a situation. Sometimes our parts are frightened and take us away from a situation. Sometimes they're out front to help us get through the day. So I had parts who were instrumental in my managing a professional life. And without them, I could not have done that. And other parts that held the abuse, parts that held the shame, and parts, of course, that held the anger and the sexuality and other aspects of who I was.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. And how about dissociation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for asking it. First of all, dissociation is a very natural function in everybody's psychic life. We all dissociate sometimes. Very simply, when you get bored, you might dissociate if you're sitting in a big lecture hall and the professor is boring and you're looking out the window at the birds or some kids playing soccer. You're not in this lecture hall anymore. You're not even in your body. You're out there with the birds or the kids playing soccer.
Daydreaming.
Yeah, that's right. Daydreaming is a kind of dissociation. Absolutely. So that's at the very normal end of the spectrum of dissociation. Dissociation is also it can happen when we need to protect ourselves from danger. So very often, veterans who come back from war often dissociate. Dissociation is a symptom of PTSD. So veterans will often dissociate. People who have been, women who have been raped, men who have been raped, will have PTSD and dissociation. So dissociation is all part of that bowl because you're protecting yourself from what's happening to your body. So you're sort of separating yourself from your body. So dissociation is a really can be a useful bodily function, bodily psychic function. And so when the trauma occurs in children frequently. There can be there's several different dissociative disorders that can develop. And so it doesn't always end up in DID. So it can simply be a dissociative disorder not otherwise specified, DDNOS. And there are also, I think it's derealization and depersonalization disorder, which is sort of feeling unreal that people can experience from trauma without going to the point of actually forming separate parts. And then there's DID, which is the most extreme form of dissociative disorders. However, it is treatable, and there is hope, and the gratitude will come.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's great. Thank you so much for clarifying that, because I think it's quite important to understand these, the terminology. And so, do you talk about all of these within your book? Because you mentioned that it's a 12-part kind of process that you talk about.
I'm sorry. I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
Oh, you mentioned about you talk about 12 parts in your book.
Oh, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure. I was misinterpreting that. But yes, in my book, I talk about everything that we're talking about here, really. Okay. But I've written it almost in the style of a novel, so that I'm telling the story. But along the way, I share things about dissociation. I share things about parts. I certainly share things about some of my parts surface in the story, and you can experience what they're experiencing through the story. I hope that it is a book or a memoir that will be really illuminating for people to understand what it's like to have dissociative disorder, to demystify it, to also see how we can work through therapeutically, and what some of the options are at the end. And again, in my case, I integrated. That isn't always the chosen option for everyone. Some people with DID will heal the symptoms of abuse, but opt to remain in parts. And that's a valid choice. So I want to make sure that your listeners are aware that some people with DID will integrate at the end of that deep therapeutic process, and others will choose to remain in parts. But you probably won't know that, because those folks are probably not going to be sharing that they have DID. I want to say it is very hard for people with DID to tell other people that they have it. Wow. I am 74 years old, and I am just coming out now with my memoir. And we're terrified to share it. When a school that I had attended published something about my book a few months ago, a professional person who also graduated from that school, whom I didn't know, emailed me right away and said, I just about jumped out of my chair. I was diagnosed 20 years ago, but I've never told anyone. Wow. Because of fear. So we're very much afraid to share this story. And that's partly because of the nature of the disorder, and partly because the public doesn't understand it, and we're afraid we'll lose our jobs. We're afraid we'll lose our friends. We're afraid that people will stigmatize us. And we don't want that to happen. So I hope that with my book and with talking to you, Anu, and with others as well, that I can help to stigmatize that, so that eventually people will feel more comfortable coming out and saying, this is who I am.
Absolutely.
This is who I am, and walk with me on my journey if you want to or not. It's your choice, but this is who I am. So that's part of what I hope will happen here.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head where, one of the key messages from this talk, and probably from a lot of my talks on trauma, is the fact that, we just need to start talking about it, because otherwise, it's difficult to heal, to accept, to forgive as well. And I think a lot of people do still struggle with that because, number one, that they've still got the traumatic memory, that they don't know what happened. And then secondly, they're just scared of the shame, because I know you mentioned shame as well, didn't you? When we just had our discussion before this talk, and that just takes over, the shame and the guilt. It just takes over people. And
yeah, and fear. I think fear is another, shame, guilt, fear.
Yeah. So it's about just communicating and then getting help. I think it's important to try and find somebody who you can trust, first of all, who you can share what happened to you with, and then obviously to go and seek help through a therapist, and get some healing, and then just start to lead a life of more presence, because again, with trauma, we're so stuck in the past as well, and we forget to enjoy the moment that we're living today.
Yes, exactly, because it's a gift, isn't it, this particular moment?
Yeah, it is. Wow. No, thank you. Yeah.
I would just say that one of the things I've been doing this past year is leading writers' workshops for free online for people with dissociative disorders. And I bring that up now because of what you said about sharing and talking, that what we're doing in these workshops is these amazing people are starting to share their story.
Nice, yeah.
In a safe environment.
Brilliant.
Through writing. Some of them write prose, some of them write essays, some of them write poetry. And so it's beautiful. It's beautiful to hear what they have to say, and to see how they have learned to trust each other, to trust me, and mostly to trust themselves, to share it. And I just wanted to bring that up because that's a part of sharing our stories, sometimes with DID and with other sexual abuse, that we isolate. We are isolated. We may not be isolated in many ways in our lives, but that part of ourselves is isolated. We don't share it with a lot of people. And so this is a way to share our stories slowly and awesomely with others who can bless us in our stories and fully understand. So I wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. Yeah. So what I'll be doing is adding all the links on the bottom of this talk in the description box on the podcast as well as on the YouTube. So I hope that my listeners can come and sign up to this, because
Absolutely.
I think
they can sign up for writers' workshops. That I have a weekly blog and newsletter that I send out that they can also receive. And I hope they might want to check out Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com for my memoir. And I just am so grateful to be in a position now that I can give back. When we're in the middle of it, it's really hard to do much more than survive. But
so
when we're in, but I can give back now, and I'm so grateful to be in that position.
So true. And again, I'm so grateful of that exact feeling every day, because you're right, for so long in my life I was just so stuck in myself because I hated myself, and the only thing that I thought that was coming to me was death. And so just to get out of that, to just, understand more about yourself, and then to try and create a bit of self-love, self-compassion, that's the place that you can actually start to give and to help others. And I think, it's so beautiful to come out on the other side, to be able to do that. And that's exactly where I am today as well.
And I love the name of your podcast, Victim to Victor, because that is exactly what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Victims, but we are not victims anymore.
No, we're not
victims anymore. And we are victors. And and even if we haven't fully claimed our victory, we're on the way.
We are, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, wow. Thank you. Wow, it's been an absolute honor having you on. I really appreciate you, and just learning about DID, dissociation. Again, these are very kind of untouched parts of trauma, I find, at the moment. They're still not widely spoken about. So the fact that, you're here educating people and raising the awareness, I think it's just so valuable. So thank you, and keep going. Keep doing this.
Thank you. Well, with people like you, I will.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. So listeners, I hope that you found this episode to be of value, because I know I sure did. And please do get in touch with Lynn. Please do check her out on her website and social channels. I'll be adding all the links in the description box. And please do get in touch with myself if you have any questions for me. And in the meantime, stay blessed, keep that faith, and just stay blessed, and practice gratitude. I think, that's the key message from today as well, is to have gratitude.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I'll see you all in the next episode. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Victim to Victor. Subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes, and be sure to follow the podcast on socials to keep updated on what's next, and share Victim to Victor with family and friends to help grow the community and spread the positive healing energy. You may also wish to join me on the path to self-discovery and sign up to my 12-week self-empowerment plan, which will be linked below.